Good afternoon and welcome to today's Tiger webinar. This series is a benefit for RIT alumni and an important part of keeping you moving forward in your professional and personal development. I'm Heidi Baumer, Director of Donor Relations and Stewardship in RIT's Division of Development Alumni Relations, and I'm your moderator for today's webinar. Before we begin, let's just take a minute to ensure that everyone is ready and familiar with the presentation tools. All participants in today's webinar have joined in mute mode and cannot be heard during the presentation. However, we absolutely encourage participation and we have a very interactive presentation planned today. To submit your questions at any time, please enter them in the chat box. The chat box can be opened by clicking on the chat icon at the right of your webinar window. We will make every effort to address all of your comments and questions throughout the webinar. You are joining today's webinar using broadcast audio. If for any reason you wish to dial in by phone, the dial-in information is provided in the chat box. Live captioning is also being provided during this webinar, and you can find the link to access that in the chat box as well. Note that today's webinar will be recorded and made available complete with captions in approximately 1 week following today's event. All participants will receive an email with the link to the recording. If you have any technical questions, please feel free to type those into the chat box as well, and we will do our best to get you the appropriate answers. And with that, let's get started. Today's webinar is the latest and greatest stories from the world of cybersecurity. Our guest presenter is Jonathan S. Weissman, Senior Lecturer in the Department of Computing Security in the Golisano College of Computing and Information Sciences. It's kind of a mouthful. Professor Weissman is the recipient of a total of 8 teaching honors and awards since 2014, including the RIT Outstanding Teaching Award, the Golisano College Outstanding Educator Award, and the RIT Distinguished Teacher Recognition Honors. He has taught more than 50 graduate and undergraduate courses, which include networking, cybersecurity, cryptography, ethical hacking and pen testing, digital forensics, malware reverse engineering, systems administration, programming, web design and scripting, database design, computer organization and architecture, and operating system design. I know those are sure a lot of different types of courses. In addition, he has developed 3 courses for the edX RITX Cybersecurity MicroMasters program, which he currently teaches to more than 200,000 students in over 200 countries. As a result of his work on Cyber 501X Cybersecurity Fundamentals, he was a finalist for the 2018 edX Prize for Exceptional Contributions in Online Teaching and Learning. Professor Weissman has co-authored and updated 2 industry-leading textbooks on CompTIA Network Plus certification and serves as technical editor for many industry textbooks. In addition, he is a networking and cybersecurity consultant for local businesses and individuals. He's been featured on both TV news and talk radio and in articles as a cybersecurity expert. He's written articles and blogs as a networking cybersecurity expert as well. And additionally, he has had some speaking engagements throughout the U.S. In these fields. He received a master's degree in computer science from Brooklyn College and holds 40 industry certifications, including CCNP Routing and Switching, CCNA Security, CompTIA Security Plus, CompTIA Network Plus, CompTIA A Plus, CompTIA Linux Plus, CompTIA Server Plus, EC Council Certified Ethical Hacker, EC Council Computer Hacking Forensic Investigator, and IPv6 Forum Certified Network Engineer, Gold. You can join the thousands of his followers on LinkedIn and Twitter at his accounts that are listed in the chat box. Jonathan, we're so happy to have you here with us today. You can take it away.
Thank you so much. By the way, it's 44 certifications right now. You've got to update that. I've got 4 more since that was printed out. Well, hello, everybody. I'm looking through the list of people, and I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces, people from my face-to-face class, people from my edX classes, my face-to-face classes, people I know on LinkedIn. It's a pleasure to see everybody. If you take a couple of seconds and put some greeting in the chat box, including your name, although your name is probably your username, where you're from, maybe what time it is, where you are, just as a little icebreaker so we can get set before we deep dive into some of these crazy stories I want to share with you guys today. See Gregory and Cheryl. I know there's a little delay as well, so we'll account for that 10-second delay or so. Denver, Iowa, Rochester, New York, South Carolina, Florida, New Hampshire, tell you what, out of all the conferences in the world that are currently being canceled or postponed, a conference, a webinar on cybersecurity is the safest place to be at this point. All right. Welcome, everybody. Great to have you with me. Today, let me tell you what the game plan is. We're going to take a look at some stories, and those of you that have followed my stories daily on LinkedIn, I post about 2 dozen, sometimes 3 dozen cybersecurity stories each day on LinkedIn. That's one of the many ways that I stay current with industry. If you haven't up until now, follow me, connect with me on LinkedIn, and read those stories. You can live vicariously through me and stay up to date, because in the world of cybersecurity, wait a minute, another 2 seconds went by, something changed. Somebody got hacked. Some data dump was released online. You got to stay up on the stuff 24/7, 365, and then even some more. So I thought it'd be a fun webinar to go through some of the latest and greatest stories to bring those posts that I make on LinkedIn, which I believe most of you are connected with me and read, to life here in this webinar. So we're going to take a look at some stories. I'm going to give you a brief overview of the stories. You'll be able to read and even scan briefly the articles that I'm going to be giving you a brief overview about. In the chat box, I posted a link to a Google Drive link where you can get this presentation that you're seeing right now on your screen. Go ahead and grab that PowerPoint, have it open, and get ready to click some links. I assure you that all those links are valid to be clicked on. You'll have to trust me on that one for today at least. And what you're going to do is you're going to chime in with your thoughts and your questions. We're not going to save questions for the end. We're going to do questions and thoughts and comments all throughout today's webinar. And I want to have some great discussions. As you can see in the upper left, I've sectioned off today's webinar into 4 categories of stories. I want to start off with some brief blasts from the past, some of my favorite stories of all time in terms of what I've seen and what I've posted on LinkedIn. We're going to take a look at some of those brief stories. And then we're going to play a connect the dots game where I take you back a number of years to some stories that actually reached fruition within the last month and even week. And then we're going to talk about some hot off the presses hacks. I call it hacks off the presses. And of course, if I was doing this webinar next week, this probably would be a completely different section. A lot of what you're going to be seeing came from the last 3 or 4 days. And then the very last part of the presentation for today, beware. Again, latest and greatest stories in terms of warnings, and you could even call that be aware. It's so interesting how the word beware is very similar to be aware. That's what we're going to be discussing today. Yep, somebody posted that there wasn't a link. There was a link back at 11:58, and then after I asked everybody to identify where they were, it sort of got bumped. But now we've got that link at the top. Thank you, Bruno, for reposting that. And with that, let's get set. Blasts from the past. Probably my single favorite story of all time is a story about this guy named Bob. Of course, Bob is not his real name. When you're teaching networking and cybersecurity, a lot of stories have the name Bob in there. There's Bob, there's Alice, there's Eve, sometimes there's Oscar. So take a second, go ahead and click on that link, and I'm going to give you a brief overview, and I'll have your thoughts and your questions in regards to what I'm calling my favorite story of all time. Start with that. And again, I do know there is a little lag between what I'm saying and what you're hearing and what you're typing back to me, so I will allot for some extra gaps. All right, so this goes way back to 2012, and the Verizon data breach incident report, one of the favorite summations of everything that's happened in the world of cybersecurity over the years, came through with a phenomenal story where there was a major corporation, unnamed of course, that was responsible for major infrastructure here in the United States. And they were requiring their off-site users to log into a VPN to get corporate access, which is of course standard operating procedure, something that was done way back in 2012 as well. But what happened was they saw that some of those VPN connections were coming in to the company from China. And they were very, very concerned, understandably so. They weren't quite sure what was going on. They had a two-factor authentication process that was set up for their VPN connections. But if you're a remote worker, you had to use the rotating RSA key fob in addition to a username and password to log in. So they didn't quite understand how there was a connection coming in from China, because they needed, these people that were logging in needed that RSA key fob that was rotating with a code the same way that the server had its code rotating. But here was the craziest thing. The developer from this company, who's going to go by the name Bob from the story, his credentials were being used in China. So Bob was logging in from China at the same time that Bob was at his desk doing his work. A VPN log showed him logged in from China. Bob was at his desk. What the heck was going on? So the security team at this major infrastructure company was doing all sorts of forensics and analysis, and they said, oh, you know, the obvious answer must be malware, something's going on, and theory after theory were debunked. They weren't quite sure what was going on, and then what they did was they actually looked at this guy's computer. They put the forensics tools on hold, and they said, let's just look at what he's got on his computer. And they found a bunch of PDFs. You might say, that's pretty cool, PDFs. What was in those PDFs? Well, it was a bunch of invoices. Invoices from this company in China. So here's the rest of the story. Bob was actually outsourcing his job to this Chinese consulting firm. He had a six-figure job. He took a portion of that six-figure salary and paid this Chinese consulting firm to do his work for him. And he FedExed his RSA token to them so they could log in and use his credentials, and he could come to work. And as the story goes, from 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., he was watching cat videos and reading stories on Reddit, playing around on eBay, Facebook, and LinkedIn. I don't think he's a contact of mine, but maybe he's actually a contact of mine right now. And maybe he's even in this webinar right now. And the story just gets crazier and crazier and crazier. The thought is that he was doing this at multiple companies. So he had this setup where he would get hired for a job, outsource his job, and show up and stick his legs up on the desk and play around on the internet. And the work that was being produced by this Chinese consulting firm, superior to everybody else in the company, quarter after quarter. They got excellent reviews. And here's a quote from the article. His code was clean, well-written, and submitted in a timely fashion. Quarter after quarter, his performance review noted him as the best developer in the building. So the obvious question is this a win-win story for everybody? What are your thoughts on this? Well, what's the problem here? What's the problem? Chime in with your thoughts, please. The integrity of the company. Also, give me that C letter that comes before the integrity piece in the CIA model, of course. Confidentiality. You guys got that right over there. It's a major infrastructure company. We can't have other countries, especially China, being privy to what's going on at this particular company. Hands down, my favorite story of all time. Any questions or comments related to this before we move on to a couple of other quick little stories? Story number 2. Go ahead and click that link. Smart toilets bidet hacked via Bluetooth gives new meaning to backdoor vulnerability. Take a second and read this story right here. While you do, I'll answer Gloria's question. They obviously put a closer watch on the tokens and the login credentials. They were actually watching it really well in the first place when you think about it, Gloria, because they noted the IP addresses were from places where VPN should not have been initiated from. Take a second and read this story here. Smart toilet. So we hear about IoT and IoT, Internet of Things vulnerabilities. This also a blast from the past going all the way back to 2013. This story is mind-boggling because why would you need to remotely control a toilet? My favorite quote from this particular article is what the advisory mentioned. As such, any person using the MySatis application can control any Satis toilet. An attacker could simply download the MySatis application and use it to cause the toilet to repeatedly flush, raising the water usage and therefore utility costs to its owner. Attackers could cause the unit to unexpectedly open or close the lid, activate bidet or air dry functions, causing discomfort or distress to the user. Thoughts or comments on this one over here? Distress to the user. Now, mind you, this was a Bluetooth vulnerability, so the attacker actually needed to be really close to the device. But when you think about a public toilet, a public restroom, where you've got hackers right outside the door, I can't really see that as being contrived. This is very, very possible. Driving by somebody's house, exactly, Gloria, with the smart bulbs and the vulnerabilities with smart bulbs that we've talked about. Anybody ever use an IoT device similar to a toilet that had no reason to be remotely controlled? More functionality, more problems, says Ray. What about a crock pot? I've heard of these crock pots that are internet connected. Isn't the point of a crock pot to start cooking your food and let it go for a certain amount of time? Toothbrushes as well. Story number 3 for our introductory look. Casino gets hacked through its internet-connected fish tank thermometer. Take a second, read through this link. This is a classic, Ray, one of my favorites. All right, so you have this casino. And when you have a casino, you got money. And when you got money, you got accounts. And when you got accounts, you got banks. And when you got accounts and banks and money, all able to be compromised because somebody at the casino wants to see what the temperature in the fish tank is. That just can't be a good thing. So there's nothing really below the surface, I guess, pun intended. There was a fish tank in this casino. And this particular fish tank was connected to the internet. And the temperature and the thermostat of this fish tank was able to be monitored. And there was a vulnerability right over here associated with this thermometer. Using the thermometer app, using the internet connection to this fish tank, attackers were able to penetrate the casino. They got into the casino. They got into the casino's database through the fish tank. And they got the database of gamblers, and they got all sorts of information, and then they dumped it into the cloud. Thoughts and comments? Questions on that? Why would you put yourself at risk? Think about possible upside, possible downside. What were they thinking? They hacked an unnamed casino through its internet-connected thermometer in an aquarium in the lobby. It wasn't even in the casino. It was in a lobby of the casino. Yeah, absolutely. Gloria says that the concern might be to kill the fish, but you know what? There are bigger fish to fry in that sense for the attackers. Lots more money and financial information and personally identifiable information to be had. Ray makes a phenomenal point. Segmentation, and there goes Nick with that same point. Segmentation, segmentation, segmentation. You take your devices that have no reason to ever have a connection to your internal devices that store information, and you put them on a completely different segment. Give me 3 letters that should be popping into your mind right now when you think about segmentation. 3 letters. It's a military term. Give me those 3 letters, please. DMZ, a demilitarized zone. Bruno gets 5 points for that. We're giving out points. Are we able to give out dollar equivalents to the points at the end of this webinar today?
I wish I could.
Sorry, guys. Just points for today. A demilitarized zone is a segmented part of your network where you do want devices to be actually accessed from the outside, from the general public. Think about a web server. Think about a DNS server. Think about stuff that's not carrying personally identifiable information or tied to your internal corporation. File servers and remote authentication servers, all that stuff should be on the inside. The devices you want the outside to hit, maybe like fish tanks, that should be in the DMZ. Bruno, want to play double or nothing? Or somebody could beat Bruno for the points on this one. What are those devices in the DMZ called? Initials BH. What are they called? I know there's a little lag. Bastion hosts. Bastion hosts. Those are the devices that are in the demilitarized zone. And now, if you're doing your segmentation even properly, those Bastion hosts are nothing but proxies or application layer gateways. So when you hit a web server in the DMZ, when you access a web server in the DMZ, you're not really accessing the web server. You're accessing a proxy, which is doing some more filtering. And if everything works out, that application layer gateway, that proxy, will now make the connection to the real web server on a different segment. That's a good way to do things. All right, let's move on to part 2 of today, connect the dots. So now, again, I'm going to start in the past, and I'm going to show you how stories that I have been following can really be tied together over a large amount of time. Starting with this link right over here from way back when in 2014. Please take a look at it. See if you could remember when Google accelerated the end of SHA-1 support and put certificate authorities on edge. Take a second and read through this link, or at least scan it. The secure hash algorithm, SHA-1, replaced MD5, Message Digest 5, in terms of the most used and the most secure hash function. And it was used for digital certificates. It was used for software updates. In terms of the integrity piece, talked about confidentiality earlier. Now we're talking about integrity. The CIA model, confidentiality, integrity, availability. Let's hit the I right over here. So let me ask you guys, either you knew it or you refresh your memories from this link over here. Why were certificate authorities fighting Google in terms of this escalated SHA-1 deprecation that Google wanted? Why were the certificate authorities fighting it? Who remembers? Brought out well by the article. Believe it or not, it was Windows XP Service Pack 2. Certificate authorities knew that lots of the web visitors for their customer sites were using XP Service Pack 2, yeah, years after Microsoft stopped support for XP. But XP Service Pack 2 in specific doesn't support the SHA-256 hash function, which is what actually replaced SHA-1. So the certificate authorities didn't want their customer sites to say, well, you know what? We get rid of the SHA-1 certificates and replace them with SHA-256 certificates. A lot of our customers who are hosting these websites will say, well, we're not going to get any people able to see our sites. So that was the major fear with these certificate authorities back in 2014. And if you take a look at this timeline, which comes from the next article, Google and the rest of the industry didn't care about these fears. We moved the deprecation of SHA-1 quicker and quicker and quicker. So on the graphic on the left, you'll notice that the time and the money needed to come up with a collision where two inputs produce that same output hash, the same message digest, that decreased exponentially in both time, cost, and effort. On the graphic on the right, you'll see that it wasn't just Google. Facebook, Microsoft, Mozilla, all the major companies sided with Google and said, yeah, we're not going to support the SHA-1 hash function anymore. It's got to be deprecated because it's only a matter of time before we actually have a collision. And of course, a collision for a hash function is the death of a hash function because now you have no more integrity. In the next article, if you take a look, I took another screenshot of some visuals you might have been familiar with. Google did this incremental warning to users when they went to websites with SHA-1 certificates that were signed, and integrity was provided with the secure hash 1 function. So up at the top, the timeline starts from January 2016 and ends at December 2016, where there was a lock that had a little yellow triangle, and yellow is usually the color for a warning. And then after January 1st, 2017, it's that red line through HTTPS and the red X through the lock, meaning, hey, you better really watch out what's going on now, because that site you're on that's claiming to protect your information, they've got a SHA-1 certificate. The third image from the top shows what you would see, what you saw back then, if the certificate authorities reissued digital certificate was actually signed with the SHA-256 hash function. And then later on, third up from the bottom right over here, you actually see with Chrome version 57, the complete dropping of support for SHA-1 certificates. Now what you see here is that red X, and now you see that version 57, we are not supporting SHA-1 any longer. Dropped unilaterally now, of course, by the other vendors. In Chrome version 68, if you take a look, there is a not secure or secure message that's going to be displayed, whether or not SHA-256 is used or not. So obviously, for SHA-256, we see green secure, but if SHA-256 is not being used, we see not secure. And Satwik has a great question. Is SHA-256 collision proof for some time now? Let me just make it clear, because I've given previous webinars and previous online demos. You might have seen me talk at great length with this in my edX courses. SHA-256, when we say SHA-256, 256 corresponds to the actual length of the output of this hash function. In other words, 256 bits. SHA-1, by comparison, had 160 bits on the output. SHA-256 comes from the family SHA-2, which has other lengths, including SHA-512. SHA-3 has another set of hash functions, including SHA-256, but a lot of devices, in fact, just about most devices out there don't support it right now. So when we say SHA-256, we are talking about SHA-2's SHA-256. And yes, It is the only accepted hash function for digital certificates today. Okay. Thomas asks, Chrome takes security most seriously out of all browsers, even though Firefox claims to go hard on privacy. Is that true in your opinion? Thomas, 1,000,000%, because as I'm going to continue with this connect the dots story, you're going to see Google is all over everything. Google is not only forcing industry standards, Google is literally setting industry standards as well. And remember, I said when we were on the previous slide, it was only a matter of time, Google was claiming, before a collision was discovered, which means two inputs producing the same message digest output. Well, it happened in 2017. Thomas, who was responsible for that? Who was responsible for proving Google right? It was. Anybody else chime in as well? It was Google researchers, of course. Take a second and read through these links. Shattered. And if you take a look at the graphic in the upper right of the slide, see that first T in shattered? It's got a little one in there. That's the play on words over there. Turd. I'll take any questions or comments before I show some other crazy things, including my thoughts. Questions or comments on this first collision, which, by the way, is known as a classical collision. This is known as a classical collision, where you have two plain text inputs that produce the same message digest, but these plain text inputs are arbitrarily chosen by the algorithm. And if you take a look at the article, you just see which one this is. I believe it's the blog article. It is in the Finding the SHA-1 Collision section. In 2013, Mark Stevens published a paper that outlined a theoretical approach to create a SHA-1 collision. We started by creating a PDF prefix specifically crafted to allow us to generate two documents with arbitrary, distinct visual contents. Arbitrary, but that would hash to the same SHA-1 digest. In building this theoretical attack in practice, we had to overcome some new challenges, and they talk about some crazy numbers, 9 quintillion computations, 6,500 years of CPU computation just for the first attack phase, 110 years of GPU computation just to complete the second phase. So that's some crazy stuff right over there. And they did produce two PDFs that actually hashed to the same message digest output. But why was that not taken 100% seriously by the cybersecurity community? That was a classical collision attack. Can anybody tell me what a chosen prefix collision attack is? In terms of producing some crazy output from a hash function. What's a chosen prefix collision attack? Who can tell? A chosen prefix attack is where you take out the word arbitrary, where the attacker now can choose two documents that exist, and the attacker can append different inputs to these documents that are already in existence. And with these appended values, the hashes are now going to match. This is more real world. This is more realistic. This is where we take theoretical out of the mix. Because in the first attack, what happened was, all right, I'll make you two documents that hash to the same value, but you know, the hash function has something to do with it. There's some arbitrary values that are involved. Now, if you say, if we wanted to take it to the next level, where we could actually compromise digital certificates and updates coming in for your phones and updates coming in for your software and documents that people have signed. If you really, really, really want to kill the hash function and make it completely have zero integrity, you've got to be able to, at will now, take some documents that already exist, append to those documents, and now make the hashes collide with your two documents. And that was the case. Here's another, by the way, pair of articles, which you can read on your own time, in relation to that first classical collision attack back in 2017. And before we actually get to, I forgot I had some little side stories right over here. Before we get to the actual chosen attack, I threw in a couple of other great graphics you might be familiar with over here. Seeing a not secure warning in Chrome, here's why and what to do about it. So instead of putting the red lines and the X's in the browsers, Chrome said, you know what? Let's just say not secure. Let's scare everybody. Let's give more of an explicit warning that sites you're on are not to be trusted. Now, before you go any further, let me ask you a question. Is there a problem if you go to a website that has no digital certificate or that has an old hash in the digital certificate and there's no PII involved? Is there a problem with that, yes or no? What do you guys think? There is a problem. Gloria, what's the problem? Even if there is no certificate. Well, Bruno, I'm saying, let's say there's no credit card information. Let's say there's no authentication. Let's say there's no personally identifiable information. What's the risk? What's the risk? Andre, Gloria, those of you that said yes, yes is the correct answer. I'm looking to fish, I guess, pun intended, fish out of you the reasons. Now we're talking business over there, Bruno. There could be all sorts of redirects when you're talking about malware and man-in-the-middle attacks, and you use other terms like cross-site request forgery and cross-site scripting. There we go. Now we're talking over here. So Google's mission, of course, was to encrypt the web. And Google was forcing all sites, no matter what you did, no matter what your nature of business was, no matter whether you're collecting information or credentials or not, to actually encrypt. And the way it's done, of course, starts with a digital certificate. Now, one of my favorite blogs that I like to read is a blog put out by Troy Hunt. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Troy Hunt. He put out a pair of articles, and I've got a bleepingcomputer.com article in relation to that as well over here on slide number 14, something called extended validation certificates. And in brief, what happened was sometimes a site needed a little bit more of authentication or a little more of security to their users than just the padlock, which of course could be faked. And these sites wanted to give even more of an assurance to their customers, to their website visitors, that they were really legitimate and in the up and up. So what they did was they paid close to $1,000, and in some cases over $1,000, for extended validation certificates. And in that case, the certificate authority goes down to your site and makes sure that everything is in the up and up, and make sure that everything is hunky-dory, and does a real thorough top-to-bottom inspection and analysis of your company. And then after you pay them about $1,000, now your certificate has a green bar and your corporation name, and it's featured prominently in the browser. But as time went on, the browser manufacturers said, wait a minute, that's a lot of real estate. Users don't even look at those green bars or those company names. Let's go ahead, let's forget about it. And more major corporations were moving away from extended validation certificates because, as Troy Hunt says over here, extended validation certificates are really really dead. All major browsers have stopped featuring any form of prominence for the companies that pay thousands of dollars for these EV certificates. The browser companies were saying it wasn't doing the users any good. They weren't looking at it, wasn't giving them any more security, and it was hogging up some important real estate. So that's why EV certificates are really dead. And this is what I was alluding to moments ago. This is the latest and greatest. It comes from May, but this is still the latest and greatest. Now, since May 13th, 2019, SHA-1 collision attacks are now practical and a looming danger. What happened was, we talked about the fact that you can use some arbitrary algorithm by the hash function to generate, like the Google researchers did a few years ago, PDFs that have the same message digest, although the ones and the zeros differ. So now, at will, we can append to a digital certificate or to some software update. And software updates, digital certificates for websites. Hey, you guys ever hear of Git, the version and control system, which still uses SHA-1? Git still uses SHA-1, and there's been a lot of talk about that. I've posted some articles related to that. Git is in the process of moving to SHA-256. So when you're talking about SHA-1, it's completely dead. It should be used for nothing today, Thomas. Zero usage should be used with SHA-1. Git is under scrutiny now. SHA-1 is not good for anything because now, with the SHA-1 attacks that are in play, SHA-1 is in shambles. Those researchers who came up with the classical collision attack have now come up, and other researchers as well, with the chosen prefix collision attack. And now different calculated values can be appended to digital certificates and software updates. So everything's in question in terms of the integrity. There should be nothing with SHA-1. SHA-1, as you see over there, is in complete shambles. Thoughts and comments on that before we move on? Nope, Nick, no browsers even supported anymore. SHA-1 isn't okay for anybody or any organization. SHA-1 is in the bit bucket with MD5, its predecessor, that SHA-1 actually replaced. MD5, Message Digest 5. We said stuff like this about MD5 many years ago as well. That's why Git is really under scrutiny, because that's really the major usage of SHA-1 today after a lot of browsers and software updates. And GPG, the new privacy guard, just recently saw some movement away from SHA-1. That's right, Kush, move with the times. Absolutely. Now, I saw Florin in the chat box who said, Let's Encrypt is a good and free solution. And there are actually a lot of free certificate authorities out there. Why are they free? Because the web, the cybersecurity of everybody is at stake. So they're taking the initiative to encrypt the web, as Google said originally. Let's encrypt the entire web. But wait a minute now. With that comes, it's a double-edged sword. It comes some problems. Look at this article from last month, a few weeks ago, from helpnetsecurity.com. Almost 3/4 of phishing sites now use SSL protection. Kush, you're correct, but you're also a psychic. I got that coming up. Hold off on that, my friend. Almost 3/4 of phishing sites now use SSL protection. What does that mean? That meant sites that would be outed as phishing sites in the past. And Tomas, you guys are psychics, unless you're looking ahead in the presentation. That's coming up as well moments from now. You guys are smart. I love the energy, but just stick with me for a couple more seconds over here. I want your thoughts on the fact that this whole fact that we're encrypting everything can now be counterproductive, because you could go to a phishing site, see the digital certificate, and go, oh yeah, got a good certificate there using SHA-256. I'm safe, but now you're not safe. Thoughts and comments on that? Absolutely, Gloria. Everything gets more sophisticated. I like what Tomas said. Better this than an unencrypted web. In other words, there are different ways for phishing to be caught. The answer is not to keep everything in plain text or use old hash functions, of course, but this is obviously something to keep in mind. Almost 3/4 of all phishing sites now use SSL protection. So there we go. Now we're talking about some of the things on your mind. Again, I love the excitement. I love the energy. Let's Encrypt issues 1 billionth web security certificate. This was on February 27th, 2020. Again, just a couple of weeks ago, right? Hot off the presses, latest and greatest. Let's Encrypt now, according to most surveys and estimates, has more than 50% of websites in terms of their digital certificates. Thoughts on Let's Encrypt having over 50% of the digital certificates with, of course, SHA-256 out there. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Is that a monopoly? Is it not a monopoly? What are your thoughts? It is, Tomas, but is there a problem when you have so many certificates in the hands of one organization? What would happen, let's say, if they made a mistake? Oh, just like they did 7 days ago, 1 week ago. Let's Encrypt to revoke 3 million TLS certificates due to bug. And without getting into the technical details, you can read that on your own time, or you can engage with me on social media on your own time. The fact is, when this article came out and when I read it and I posted it to LinkedIn a week ago, there was some great fear that this could be some form of denial of service on the web because it has a lot of certificates that are being revoked in obviously a very short amount of time. Take a second and read through this article. Some of the highlights of this one. This, by the way, does represent 2.6 of their overall 116 million active certificates. It's a small percentage, but still it's a phenomenally large number. More certificates, more problems. Is that how the song went or something like that? More certs, more problems. And then, in conclusion of this second part of today's webinar, before we move on to parts 3 and 4, Firefox turns controversial new encryption on by default in the US. DNS over HTTPS, which is supported by the other browsers, but as you see here again, just a couple of weeks ago, on February 25th, 2020, Firefox turned this on by default. And in short, again, without getting too technical, now those DNS queries are not going to go through your DNS servers. They're going to go through the servers, through the browser, and the actual queries and responses through the phenomenal protocol of DNS are going to be encrypted. Firefox is the first vendor not to support DNS over HTTPS, but to actually turn it on by default. Thoughts or comments on that? And now, in conclusion, this goes by so quickly. Is it really 12:50 Eastern time right now? How the heck did that happen? Oh my gosh. Time flies by when you're having a great time. I hope you guys are having the great time that I'm having right over here. Let's see some hacks off the presses over here. February 19th, 2020, again, less than a month ago. U.S. gas pipeline shut after ransomware attack. Let's think about this for a second. We talked about that infrastructure company that Bob worked for. This is a similar major infrastructure company. You'd have to say the U.S. gas pipeline is very, very important for our infrastructure over here. Can somebody tell me how this attack started? You can either tell me if you remember when I posted on LinkedIn or you read it on your own, or do a brief glance. How did this attack start? You know the answer, even if you don't know the answer now. You know what it is. Tell me what it is. Go ahead. Somebody say it. You got it, Carl. It was a spear phishing email. Somebody clicked on a link that they shouldn't have, and it shut down the U.S. gas pipeline. Ray, right on the money with segmentation as well. But we're talking about an email, a link. You always hear people tell you don't click on links. Well, you know what? If you're working for the United States gas pipeline, how could you click on a link like that? Come on. What is wrong with you? February 20th, 2020, less than a month ago, MGM hack exposes personal data of 10.6 million guests. Take a second and read through this one. The data exposed included names, addresses, and passport numbers for former guests. Anybody stayed at an MGM resort recently? Among the people who were impacted, Justin Bieber, Twitter founder Jack Dorsey, and some other major celebrities. Gotta figure if this is the MGM, some prominent names might be featured as well. Clearview AI has billions of our photos. Its entire client list was just stolen February 26, 2020, a few weeks ago. So this is a controversial company. You guys ever hear of Clearview AI? They basically scrape the web and they collect photos that are publicly accessible. They don't hack. They don't penetrate where they shouldn't penetrate. This is all publicly accessible photos. These are all publicly accessible photos that they scrape. They make a database, and law enforcement relies heavily on this database. And there are a lot of concerns about Big Brother, and some privacy concerns have been raised related to this company. Well, you know what? Their entire client database of billions of photos scraped from the web, hacked. Thoughts and comments or questions on this one right over here? Some crazy stuff. Tomas asks, were Europeans impacted as well? I believe they are global. So that would be a yes. Carnival Cruise Lines hacked on March 4th, 2020. We're talking now about less than a week ago. And I'll say it again, if this webinar was next week or next month, all these would be different, because all of these are going to be old and obsolete stories in a couple of days. Can somebody tell me what else happened on Carnival Cruise Lines? What else happened on Carnival Cruise Lines recently? Paul is right on the money. That's a big story about Carnival Cruise Lines, the virus, coronavirus going around. Heavily prominent on that. And now you have to worry about your physical life and your physical security in addition to your digital security, because according to this story, if you take a second and look through some of the highlights of this story right over here, the company identified a series of deceptive emails sent to employees, resulting in unauthorized third-party access to some employee email accounts. Data accessed included email accounts, names, social security numbers, government identification numbers, passport numbers, health-related information, and credit card information of guests and employees. So this is, the proverbial adding insult to injury. And I want to conclude today. I know we're up against the clock. Beware, beware, beware. March 4th, 2020, Hacker's Delight. Small businesses investing more in Internet of Things, less on cybersecurity. So go back to some of those earlier stories. The story about the toilet. They're spending more money in developing things that don't need any connection rather than actually securing those connections. March 6th, 2020, 4 days ago, 1 billion Android devices at the risk of hacking. Basically, the story is going to tell you that if you have an Android phone that is more than 2 years old, you are at great risk of being hacked in terms of the updates coming in for devices that are greater than, and the OSs specifically, that are greater than 2 years of age. March 6, 2020 as well, 4 days ago. Millions of VPN users at risk of hacking. Here's what you need to know. You know what? Instead of reading the article, I'll tell you what you need to know. Free VPN services are bad. You're putting your faith in them for no reason. Read that article. You'll find out what I'm telling you, what you probably knew already. If it sounds too good to be true, it is. Don't ever sign up for a free VPN service. March 7th, 2020, 3 days ago, Microsoft confirms really, really high hacking risk for millions of users. Here's what you do now. You know what the story is basically saying? Microsoft is saying 99%, according to them, of their users don't have multi-factor authentication. 99%. So what Microsoft is saying is it's not us, it's you. And in the same vein, on March 9th, 2020, hey, that was yesterday. Yesterday, two-factor authentication isn't as secure as you might expect. The founder of Twitter, who we actually mentioned, Jack Dorsey, not only having his information stored and stolen by the MGM database breach, he was actually targeted in a SIM card attack, in terms of multi-factor authentication. And going back just a little bit, a couple of weeks, Android malware can steal Google Authenticator 2FA codes. So here we are, we're saying, okay, NIST says don't use SMS, simple message service, for two-factor authentication because it's not an added factor. Don't use SMS. Use something like Google Authenticator. Well, you know what? Google Authenticator now has a vulnerability with malware. And again, yesterday, Google took a step in the right direction. This is yesterday's article, March 9th, 2020. Google just made it easier to use 2FA to secure your accounts, lowering the barrier to use 2FA to protect Gmail on macOS and Android devices, which is a good step in the right direction. And the final article that I have, I just want you to take a second and look through this. This is our last article we're doing in a quick flash fashion to conclude right over here. Dump your passwords, improve your security. This article goes into great detail on why hardware devices, like actual keys, hardware keys, are the way to go and the future of security. Take a second. I just want to have you skim this article really, really briefly here. Last but not least, right over here. Security keys. Kush, we don't skip VPNs. We use reputable ones because we're putting our faith in them. The ISP might not see what you're sending through the VPN, but the VPN provider will. So you have to put your faith in a VPN provider, and I don't put my faith in anybody that gives me free service, because if the service is free, you are the information. So SAT Week, in terms of signing up for Google Authenticator, please read this article in more depth after the webinar ends in a couple of seconds, because the future is security keys. And if you take a look, some highlights in terms of this article right over here, in terms of security keys. Phishing scams are based on the fact that login pages require the user to manually verify that they're on the right site. If you slip up even one time, mistaking a 1 for an L or an L for a 1 in the URL, you're dead. Security keys flip this on its head, where now we're trading something humans are bad at, which is noticing subtle differences, for something computers are good at, identifying exact matches. With security keys, instead of the user verifying the site has to prove itself to the key. So whether it's a physical security key that you insert into a USB port or a lightning port or through Bluetooth, but no, don't worry, it's not that bad, because you actually have to use the Bluetooth on your phone. You have to set it up with the browser first. So whether it's a phone using Bluetooth to communicate with the browser that's set up first, or a physical security key, now the site has to prove itself to our authenticating device. And that's my final thought of the day. Thank you so much for joining us. If you want to follow up on LinkedIn, I'd be more than happy. If you want to follow up on Twitter, I'd be more than happy. If you want to follow up on Instagram, I'd be more than happy. Please be in touch with me and stay safe.
So that's all the time we have for today. Thanks everyone for such an interactive session. If you have any questions, obviously there's contact information on the screen. You can also reach out to us at ritalum@rit.edu. Many thanks to you, Jonathan, for sharing your expertise, and we thank our audience for all of your interactive questions and comments and answers. It's really been a lot of fun. We do want to remind all of our Tiger alumni that your annual gifts, whether large or small, are helping today's students achieve their dreams, and want to thank you for them. Annual gifts from our alumni also help to raise our national reputation, which is constantly on the rise. So we thank you for that as well. If you'd like to make a gift, please visit rit.edu/make-a-gift, and you can select an area of the university that matters to you. Please join us also for our upcoming Tiger webinars. Next Wednesday, March 18th, we'll have a panel from Saunders College EMBA program that's going to present the government regulations and business success. And on Monday, March 23rd, we'll welcome Nita Genova for an entertaining look into the Indian cinema during Good Golly, It's Bali. Thank you again for joining us today. Please exit this webinar by simply closing your Livestream window, and please do let us know what you thought of the webinar through a brief survey that you will receive via email. Have a great day.
Take care.